In the quiet town nestled between rolling hills, a small, ivy covered house sat near the edge of a forest. Time had not been kind to it, the paint had faded, and the once vibrant garden was now overtaken by weeds. On the porch, an elderly dog named Duke lay, his graying muzzle resting on his paws, staring out into the distance. He looked almost like a statue, still quiet, waiting. 5 years had passed since his beloved owner, Henry, had gone away. 5 long years since the world had become empty for Duke. Henry was more than a companion to him, he was the center of Duke's world. They'd shared everything together, walks at dawn, fishing trips by the lake, and afternoons in the garden, Henry tending to the roses while Duke watched loyally by his side. Their lives were simple, full of love, and deeply intertwined. But one cold winter morning, Duke had awakened to find Henry not in his usual chair by the window. The house was silent, too silent. It wasn't unusual for Henry to be late. He'd sometimes go into town for a few things. But this time, he never returned. Hours turned into days, and the silence in the house deepened. It wasn't until the neighbors came by, their faces somber, that Duke realized something terrible had happened. Henry had passed away unexpectedly, a heart attack taking him in the night. The news was a sharp blow that Duke couldn't quite comprehend. For the first few days, Duke stayed close to Henry's chair, his ears twitching at every creak of the floorboards. He would nudge at the door, hoping for Henry to return, but he never did. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The house remained the same, frozen in time. Duke spent his days pacing from room to room, sniffing the air, always searching for the familiar scent of his owner. He refused to sleep anywhere except Henry's side of the bed. The nights were the hardest. The house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside, but it was the silence that stung the most. Duke could still hear the faint echo of Henry's voice, calling him to come inside after a walk or telling him stories while he worked in the garden. Every evening, Duke would climb the front steps and sit on the porch, his eyes scanning the road, hoping to see Henry walking back home. He would wait there long into the night, the weight of his grief pressing down on him with each passing hour. Sometimes the neighbors would come to visit, offering food and kind words, but Duke didn't understand. He would simply look up at them with eyes that had seen too much sadness. One particularly quiet afternoon, Duke's body had begun to show the signs of his age, his steps slower, his fur graying more each day. The seasons had changed countless times, but Duke remained constant. He would still wait on the porch as he always had, his heart heavy with memories. Every once in a while, he would lift his head at the sound of a car approaching, a small spark of hope in his eyes. But when the car would pass and the road fell silent again, his shoulders would slump, and he would return to his post, waiting. As the years wore on, Duke's health began to decline. He had been through so much age, loss, loneliness, but he never left the house, never strayed far from where he last saw Henry. The neighbors began to notice how frail he had become. Some offered to take him in, but Duke would have none of it. He had only one place in the world, and that place was where Henry had once stood beside him. On the 5th anniversary of Henry's passing, the sun set behind the hills, casting a soft golden glow over the land. Duke was lying on the porch, his head resting on his paws, eyes closed. The gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees around him, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the world had stopped frozen in a moment where time no longer mattered. A car passed slowly by the house. Duke's ears perked up as the sound reached him. For a moment, he lifted his head, staring out at the road with a distant look in his eyes. There was no car waiting at the end of the driveway this time, no footsteps hurrying up the path, just the fading echoes of the world around him. And so Duke lay back down. His breathing was shallow, his eyes grew heavy, and he finally allowed himself to let go. In the quiet stillness of the evening, he slipped away, his body finally resting beside the house where he had waited for so long. The porch was empty, but the house remained unchanged, a silent witness to the love and loyalty between a man and his dog. The neighbors, when they found him, knew that Duke had found peace, the kind that can only come when the waiting stops and the heart finally reunites with its lost companion. The house stood quiet once more, but the memories of Duke and Henry lingered in the air, a love that had never truly left, not even in death.